Hi, welcome to week 4. We're going to look at advertising as an industry this week. Now, there's a lot you can do with industry, but we're going to try to focus on the way that Winston Fletcher in the readings, in his short introduction to advertising, does a kind of simple, elegant, and beautiful, straightforward analysis. Probably the easiest readings I think of so far this year. And he's able to map the industry quite well. Admittedly, he's doing it from a British perspective, but even with that, the interesting thing with advertising is the agency model, no matter where you are, whether you're in the United States or Canada or the UK or Australia, is roughly the same and has gone through very similar pattern changes. So the first thing is to understand, as Winston describes it, is the industry is tripartite. There are the advertisers, and this is the thing that you can often get confused with, and I don't want you to get confused with this when you're writing, in your first gallery assignment, or, your posts on discussion boards too. Advertisers are the manufacturers, the service companies. They are not the advertising agencies, okay? And he says, this is the author, he says that not everyone advertises. It's not essential that everyone advertises. A big steel manufacturer really doesn't care that much about how his or her product is moving outwards. Doesn't really have to advertise very much. One of the things that Fletcher doesn't talk about is that there is a kind of industry that's called B2B, which is business to business advertising. And it's fairly big, but it's very, very focused. And it may only be trying to beat out a competitor that's trying to get a particular basic primary industry sort of manufacturer to move their product in a certain way or be carried on a certain ship. The other elements besides the advertiser itself, the person who pays the money for all these things, is that there is the media and there are the agencies. The media is kind of the linchpin of it all, and the media is the placing of ads, and the agency is more or less the creative production of the ads itself. I think what's interesting historically about advertising is that money, the money movement to the agency, you would think it was the advertiser, the manufacturer, who paid the agency to make this creative production. But as you'll find from the reading, not true. For at least until the 1950s, 1960s, the money all came from the media companies. Isn't that interesting? Television station, radio stations, newspapers, magazines actually employed, in a sense, or paid a commission to agencies to pull in the business to make their things profitable. And what agencies are really good at, in a sense, and they were called full service agencies, they were really good at helping a particular publication find sort of advertising sort of money to keep them going. So if you can imagine that certain things like, winemakers of Australia said, oh God, how are we gonna connect to advertisers? This is a publication trying to do it. How are we going to connect to advertisers to make this particular magazine make money? Well, that was the agency's role originally in the entire industry of advertising. And what they got was a 15% commission. And what they embedded in that 15% commission that they got from all those media sources, whether it's newspapers, magazine, radio, all those things, is that what they had to embed in that was all the creative work that they would do for the advertiser, and also the placement, the media placement that they also gave to the advertiser, but was kind of a deal that they made with the media industry itself. So in some ways, and it was taken apart by different royal commissions in the UK and similarly in other countries, it kind of was a bizarre kind of industry. Getting a commission from one source, but really servicing another source in this tripartite structure. Over time, the shift was away from this, and so that instead of these full service agencies who managed the media buying, but also managed the creative things, it split off, and the agency element of the tripartite system became creative agencies and media agencies. And so where this came from, why this happened, and Winston Fletcher doesn't really talk about this in the reading, but I think it's very much related to the importance and significance of the value of brands over time. So over time, the image of a company was actually seen as valuable on the stock exchange itself instead of just the bricks and mortar of a particular manufacturer. And this changed the kind of relationship they had to agencies themselves, because the agencies were fundamentally responsible for this production of an image, means that in a sense the advertising agent moved a little bit closer to the advertiser and a little bit away from the media people. And the commission thing sort of broke down. The 15% commission, it's still there. They still get a little take from the media industry, but it's not as big a take as advertisers start working out different aspects of what they do. And the other shift is, I suppose, who handles the kinds of accounts that happens in the advertising industry. One of the things that developed was that the early advertising industry was dominated by copywriters. Okay, they were the creative geniuses, or maybe you say genii, in the industry. But as the sort of transformation of the media world changed in the 20th century, and there were many more visual forms of advertising, whether it was actually in magazines because they could print in color, or really kicked off when television came in, that it was kind of not a waste, but something had to change because they had to coordinate advertising with a much more visual message. And so what changed from copywriters as being the kings of creative agencies, it became an art director who managed it all, the text and the images. Kind of the Don Draper of advertising emerged. And you had this sort of coordinated campaign where the media buyers would be involved and the research would be involved. And there was an account planner who dealt with the advertiser himself. But that art director was the person who put the creative quality of that campaign together and then passed it on to the other sorts of people. So the things to understand in this thing is that advertising agencies actually broke off, media agencies and creative agencies. But another formation, which happened roughly from the 80s onwards, was a conglomeration of what was happening in advertising, specifically internationally. And so you had the development of marketing service conglomerates that had all sorts of these boutique agencies that might handle little elements, the research element, the media buying element, the creative element. They might even have little agencies that were really good at particular things. They're really good at television, or they're really good at radio or print. And those were all kind of bought out by these large entities. And their names are pretty important for you to know and think about. So I'm just going to list a few, and it's definitely in the readings too. WPP, Omnicom, Havas, and Publicis are some of the biggest advertising firms, but they're more than advertising firms because they embed all these subsidiaries of little agencies that have people's names attached to them or attached to particular cities all over the world. And so what you see is that you might have a digital agency, but it's technically owned by, say, WPP, but you would know it as a very specific sort of artist that was involved in it, creative advertising artist. Okay. The final element I want you to understand for today is you have to understand that there are different parts in this creative production, and you'll find this actually in play in your first gallery assignment, but in giant play when you do the second one, which is involved with campaigns. So there's the copywriter, there's the visual team, and they piece together something of a storyboard campaign. And they put that together under, again, the role of the art director. So connected to this final element, which is always an issue that we have as professors, we always want to add some other extra detail when we're talking about things. I want you to be incredibly aware of the type of ads this week and start to use that vocabulary that I know exactly what you're talking about on discussion boards and in your gallery assignments too. So display ads, that's the Ivory Soap one. Almost all the ads that we've looked at Not quite, but definitely in week 3. Outdoor advertising. What is that? That billboard sort of structure. The things that you see, at a stadium, the MCG or Etihad, where they have it on the boundaries of the actual field. Online advertising. Try to work out the different ways in which advertising is done and structured there. Television and video, which is often called, and we're going to call it here, whenever you use that, I want you to use the word commercial. Okay? Even though commercial could be used for all sorts of things, I want it to be used specifically for radio and television. And that's an international term for it, as far as I can see. As well, be aware of how companies coordinate international campaigns, but also regionalize them to some degree. So you'll find some giant company playing around with a particular meaning right around the planet. But then, they might have to specialize it because they're actually selling it in Kohl's in a specific week and have to have a specific price for it. So you can see that often those global campaigns actually have to be managed by regional offices, and they're tailor-made for different things. So the complexity of the advertising industry is fascinating. It's an industry that has enormous organization of creative work. This is interesting in and of itself. But also massive research about what works and why. So every time there's creative work, there are teams of people, maybe they're called the suits in the company, but they're working out whether those things work or don't, and also assessing after the fact. The advertisers themselves are doing it, but the agencies are also providing the service as to whether something has hit its target, has hit its market, and is expressing exactly what the company needs to say. There are lots of failures that exist in advertising. One of the ones that your reading points to is Edsel failing in 1959. Incredible car, didn't make it. You could read that and try to work that out. And the billions spent on advertising is in fact carefully developed. And this is the interesting thing. I would say more so than film and television productions themselves. There's a lot more kind of flying by the seat of your pants in developing a sitcom or developing a drama for television or even a film than what happens in advertising. Here's a creativity that does a massive amount of research before they even invest in a particular creative campaign. And they take chances every once in a while. And that's what you see in the history of this development of an industry. Sometimes you'll see them take chances even when they're not sure of how it will work. They just know that in terms of attracting attention, they might pull people, like into the VW Beetle way back in the early 60s. It might pull people to say, this is kind of a cool car. I might move to that purely on the basis of the emotion, the vague rationality of how an ad produced an incredibly creative 1-minute piece or a display ad in a magazine. So get through all those things. The last thing I want you to sort of do, I didn't mean to do that, is on the discussion board, I really want to get a sense of thinking about how advertising in different media sources changes its impact and effect. I want you to also think about your susceptibility to advertising messages. This is kind of a little bit like week 1. And also, which kind of advertising or types of advertising actually work. But maybe even though it says it's a follow-up question, I want you to maybe this week in the discussion board say which part of the advertising industry interests you the most. And tell me why. Where does it connect with you? And that'll give me a sense of how you understand the industry. And play it off a little bit, say, well, I like the creative, but I'm more of a research nerd. Anyway, I'll hear it on the discussion board, and you're getting close to Gallery 1 assignment, so keep that in mind as you develop these things. The stuff you've done so far, incredibly valuable for the assignment, incredibly valuable for your understanding more generally. So I'll see you next week.